You're trying to pass a car on the road, but suddenly they swerve into you, forcing you into a ditch. You manage not to get injured, and you get up to make sure the other driver is okay, when the other guy gets out of his car and starts blaming you. Does it matter who's at fault? And if so, can you prove who's to blame? Who determines fault after a crash?
Initially, a cop is going to decide who he or she thinks is at fault by deciding whether or not to write a ticket. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. I've seen a lot of crashes where the cop doesn't write any ticket at all. Bottom line is, if the cop tickets you as a result of a crash, then the cop is saying that he or she believes you're the one that's at fault.
If they think you're at fault, do you have to pay that ticket?
No. And it's really important to make a decision early on. Do you agree with the cop? Do you possibly have an injury case? Because, for example, if the cop writes you up for an improper pass or failure to yield the right of way or something of that nature, if a cop writes you up for speeding 10 miles an hour over the speed limit and you just pay the ticket, you just confessed guilt to speeding 10 miles an hour over the speed limit. If you just sign the ticket and pay the fine, you just admitted guilt to that charge, which is going to be held against you if you end up filing a claim based on that crash.
Cop cites you, we'll say failure to yield, right? And you don't agree. You don't think this is at all what happened, and the cop is just taking the other guy's word over yours. So you say,
okay, I'm not going to pay this ticket.
What's the next step you usually need to take?
You mark that you're not guilty and you send it in. They will assign a trial date and you'll end up in traffic court to determine whether the state can prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you are guilty of that traffic offense.
When we get to who's at fault, there's this thing called comparative negligence in Iowa. What is that?
In any crash, no matter how many people are involved in the crash, there's going to be 100% fault to divvy up between the people that are involved in the crash. So if it's just you and me, for example, 100%, someone's going to assign a portion of that to you and a portion of that to me, whether it be initially the cop or later a jury, but a certain percentage of fault will be assigned to each of us for that crash.
Is there a percentage that prevents you from recovering?
Yes. If you're responsible for more than 50% of the cause of that crash, you cannot recover. If a jury determines that you are 50.1% at fault, you can't recover. 50 or less, you can still recover.
So I've heard it called 50 and a feather, essentially.
Yeah, I don't know if I've heard that one, but yeah, that's true. If you're at all over 50% at fault, you cannot recover.
But let's say you and I get in a crash and we go through full jury trial. At the end of it, they give us each 50% fault. Not more than, but exactly 50%. So let's say I have $100,000 in damage and I'm 50% at fault. What does that do to what I get out of that $100,000?
The judge is going to do the math. I mean, the jury provides the $100,000 in damages and the 50% fault. The judge is then going to take that 50% fault, apply it to the $100,000 verdict, and reduce it to a recovery for you of $50,000 because you were half responsible for the crash.
So the percentage of fault is going to change the amount that I get regardless of what the jury says is the full amount on the verdict.
Absolutely it is.
So is this comparative negligence, this 50% and a feather, is that strictly something that's in Iowa? Is that something that's in all 50 states? How does that work?
It is in most states. I mean, the way it is in Iowa is the way it is in a majority of jurisdictions around the country. However, it is not that way in every jurisdiction, so it's something that's important to know. If you're somebody that's considering filing a claim for an injury, it's important to know how that state handles the allocation of fault and how it affects your recovery.
Fair. If fault is in question after a crash, do the smart thing, give us a call before you pay that ticket. Now, click over here to see when you're at fault for passing farm machinery on the highway.